all, 'tis I. How are you doing? So the last time I spoke to you, I was just about to go off on my olive-ops with my dad, and I confess that I was slightly trepidatious about it, because as much as I love my daddy, we are very, very similar, to the point where we could argue black is dark grey. And I was slightly concerned that we would clash now and again. And also, we haven't been on holiday together since I was a very little girl. So, yeah, that was, it was going to be interesting. But as it turned out, we got on very well. We got on really, really well. We went off to Malta. I had been there before, my dad had been there before, but we had both been with other people who weren't quite so interested in seeing things and visiting places as my dad and I were. I love Malta because of its history. Basically, Malta wouldn't be as it is were it not for the Knights of St. John and the associated knightly orders that ended up on Malta. Much of its original architecture is pre-Knights of St. John medieval, and then an awful lot of stuff that the Knights of St. John built. There are fortified cities and towns all over all three of the islands. It's a fascinating place. The first day we went into Valletta, and I took Dad into St. John's Cathedral, which my dad had not been particularly bothered about seeing until I said to him, "Dad, you've got to come in just for the floor. Come in for the floor. Ignore the rest of the church, but come in and look at the floor." And he came in, and the floor is absolutely stunning, completely stunning. And every one of these highly decorated blocks is actually a tombstone. We also had a look round Fort St. Elmo, which was one of the original medieval bastions that was built there as part of the defence system for the whole island. On Tuesday, we went out to Rabat and Mdina. Hubby had been sat next to a lady on the plane, and she said, "Oh, you've got to go to the catacombs at St. Paul's." Oh, right, well, okay. Well, hubby and I had been to the catacombs in France, and we in Paris, and we were quite excited because we like those, you know, me being a dodgy old goth, anything kind of spooky and weird. So we got there. Yeah. I was kind of expecting to go in one end and walk through catacombs and come out the other end as I had done in Paris, but this was not the same. The nature of the rock in Malta is such that when the water comes through it, it actually acidifies. So when it hits anything organic, it just eats it away. So there were no skeletal remains in the catacombs. There were just the carved benches and holes and rooms where the bodies once had been laid. I'm guessing that there were grave goods and things because they were in the little kind of museum bit right at the beginning of the catacomb tour. But there was nothing now left in the actual catacombs themselves. There was just holes in the rock. And explanations of what this was and what that was, which I just felt it maybe could have been better presented. There's large flat areas where apparently the Romans would gather to celebrate their ancestors, and they would have a feast down there. This large flat rock, they would all prop themselves up on one elbow on a cushion, and in the middle there was this carved tray where all the food would be, and then they would leave some of the food for the spirits of their ancestors. And I can appreciate that you don't want to be leaving real food down there, but it could have been mocked up, you know, with kind of waxwork fruit and models of bread and fish or whatever, and then, you know, had some fabric lying on the tabletop thing with a cushion or two. I don't know, that was just me. It just got to the point where you'd seen one hole, you'd seen them all, because they, for whatever reason, maybe the ceilings were too low or they were dangerous. You couldn't start at one end, come out the other. You went down a hole and you came out of the hole, and then you went down the next hole and you came out of that hole. It just wasn't that interesting. I was disappointed, if I'm honest. And I kind of dragged my dad over there to see it, and he was just as disappointed as I was. But you know, you weren't to know until you got there. It's not somewhere I would recommend I wouldn't personally recommend someone going to see it, really. Whilst we were in Rabat, it chucked it down with rain. It was the only day that we had rain, was on the Tuesday. Thankfully, I'd taken my umbrella because I used it as a parasol anyway, but I think Mumsy bought herself a brolly, but my dad got wet and hubby got wet. We left Mumsy and Dad in a little cafe whilst hubby and I went into Mdina, which was the original capital of Malta, and it's a medieval walled, well, they call it a city, it's a town really, it's a tiny little place, but it's absolutely stunning. It's so pretty. There's very, very limited vehicular traffic in there. I think only residents people who actually live in there are allowed to take their cars in, and even then they can only get so far. It's a tiny, tiny little place. There's a big exhibition in there about the Knights of Malta, which was fascinating. Predominantly the Knights of St. John, but they did call it the Knights of Malta. And, you know, we walked round and walked in and saw everything. So we had a really nice day. Coming home from Rabat and Mdina on the bus, we went past what I believe to have been the Torre Lanzun. We went past it. So I think that's where we're going later on. Through circumstances which are somewhat tedious, I won't bore you with now, I am an officer of merit in the companionate of the Knights of St. Lazarus of Jerusalem. Get me. And their headquarters is on Malta. It's not open to the public, and it's in a little suburb, San Juan, just outside Slima. And if you didn't know what you were looking for, you'd blink and you would miss it. And as I said, we were on the bus, and as I went past this building, I thought, that looks familiar from the photographs I've seen. That looks like it. I think that's where we're going. And it turns out that I was right. It isn't open to the public. It's a working headquarters of the order, but I was very, very lucky in that the commander of the Castello Commandery was kind enough to come down and open the building up and show myself and my family around. And he gave up a good, 3 or 4 hours of his time. He told us the history of the building itself, as well as the history of the order. It was absolutely fascinating. And deeply touching, actually. I got a lot more out of it than I expected to. The Knights of St. Lazarus are a Christian order, hospitaller order, and I'm neither a Christian nor am I a hypocrite, so I can't actually become a full member of the Knights of St. Lazarus, but I am very, very proud. Having been to the headquarters, I'm very, very proud of being an officer of merit in the companionate. So I'm going to be looking to increase my involvement somehow, as a result of the visit there. The Torre Lanzun is basically a fortified farmhouse, and once upon a time it was the only building in a very wide farming landscape, and it was designed to repel attackers. So it has a small tower on the top. And the building itself only had to repel any attackers for 30 minutes, because once the signal fire was lit on the top of the building, it would be seen by the cavalry in Mdina, and they would be there within half an hour in order to reinforce the people in the Torre Lanzun. So absolutely fascinating, beautiful place. On the Wednesday, we went to a local market, and then went from the market back into Valletta and had a wander around and saw some of the things that we hadn't seen on the Monday. And my dad persuaded me to get on a ferry and go to the Three Cities, which is south of Valletta, across the harbour south of Valletta. I went on the ferry 4 times over the holiday, and usually I get sick on a duck pond, so I was feeling very pleased with myself. I can't say I enjoyed any of the journeys, but I coped with them. And we got across the water, and we had a wander around the Three Cities, and then we jumped on a bus and came back to the hotel. The apartment. On the Thursday, Mumsy decided we were going to have a magical mystery tour, so we went outside the apartment building and got on the first bus that came along and rode it until we got to the end. And then we got off and we got on the next bus and we did the same thing. Or if we saw something in the distance that looked interesting, we'd get off the bus and go and have a look. It was a wonderful way to see the island, actually. We saw quite a lot of the countryside and the little villages. All around the coast of the island, and some sort of crisscrossing the island as well, there are these towers, lookout towers, that were initially built during the early medieval period and have been updated and reinforced over the years. And if you stand by one tower, you can see the one either side. And the idea of these, again, that they would have a signal fire on the top. And apparently, if the signal fire was lit at the tower in Victoria Rabat on Gozo, then the signal would be seen in Valletta within a couple of minutes. And it was a warning that that invaders were on the way. It primarily used in medieval times to warn of the impending invasion of the Ottoman Turks. These were later used during the Napoleonic Wars, and most of them have got anti-aircraft gun stations on the top of them now, and they were used in World War II. We ended up in Bougiba for lunch. Bougiba is very touristy. It's really the only place around that's sort of close to a beach. It's very built up. It could be anywhere. But we had a very nice lunch, so we didn't care. We jumped on another bus and came back across the country rather than up the coast this time. And we're just driving along and spotted this interesting looking dome, so we rang the bell and we got off the bus and we were in Modesta. And we had a little look round the town and we went into the Modesta church and saw the dome complete with its World War II bomb that came through the roof and landed in the middle of the floor and did not detonate. They've kept it. It's been made safe and they've kept it in the church. We stopped again for tea and cake because that's what we do, and then again we just made our way back to our apartment. We were situated in Jazeera, which is just literally outside, one street away from Slima, and it was a very quick walk down to the Slima waterfront from where we could get practically anywhere. So it was a really nice apartment in a really nice complex. It wasn't a holiday complex, it was a residential complex. So it wasn't full of horrible tourists, which is a really ironic thing to say considering that I was a horrible tourist, but there we are. 5-minute walk down to the front and then a 10-minute ride into Valletta from which you could get anywhere on the island. So a really nice place to stay. Lots of very nice restaurants and cafes down on the harbour front as well. Thursday was a very special day for me because it was my 14 years all clear anniversary. So I had decided that I was taking everyone out for dinner that night. The last time I was in Malta, I found this wonderful restaurant, which was actually in one of the original medieval forts. And it was great because there was suits of armour all over the place and there was weaponry all over the wall, and I loved it. So I was very pleased to find that it was still there and it was still a restaurant. What I didn't do was go in until the Thursday evening when I had planned to take everybody there for dinner, and I walked in and the suits of armour had all gone and the weaponry had all gone, and every flat wall had a large screen television on it, and every television was showing a Champions League football match. It had turned into a sports restaurant. There was hardly anybody in there. So I said, I'm very sorry, this is not the place I thought it was, I'm not staying here. We then found a little, tiny little restaurant tucked up a side road that was traditional Maltese. So we went in and they managed to squeeze us into a table in the corner, and they came to take our order and they asked my dad what he wanted. And he said he'd like the lamb cutlets. Oh yes, and how would you like them cooked? Well done. He said, I want them cooked all the way through. Oh no, we don't do that. We do them medium rare or medium. Dad said, well, I don't want them medium rare or medium. I would like them well done, please. I want them cooked all the way through. Oh, no, we won't do that. They don't taste very nice like that. Well, I'm sorry. If my dad had said, could you take them out into your back garden and put a flamethrower on them, that's what you do. You know, if the paying customer wants their meat, whatever it is, burnt to a charcoal, that's what you do. Oh, no, we're not doing that, said this rather patronising, supercilious waitress. So my dad had a look through the menu, and because he kind of set his heart on the lamb cutlets, there was nothing else there that he wanted. So I said, that's fine, we're going, we're not staying here, we either eat together or we don't eat at all. So we left. So by this time I'm thinking this evening is going to be a complete washout. We managed to find a restaurant down towards the Slima ferry, and we had a very, very nice meal. It looked very boutique-y, and we thought that the food was going to be a bit nouvelle cuisine, where you get, you know, a square inch of meat and 3 peas artistically arranged on a plate. But it wasn't. It was very nice food, and we ended up having a lovely meal, and I ended up having a lovely anniversary of my 14 years all clear. On Friday, hubby and I left Dad and Mumsy to their own devices, and we jumped on the bus and another ferry and went off to Gozo. And we passed the island of Camino to get there. And as soon as we got off the ferry, we jumped on a bus and went to Ilrabat, Victoria, which is the capital city of Gozo. And it's tiny. The place is tiny. We had a look round the actual citadel, the walled city itself. And again, it's fascinating. It was early medieval originally, and it had been reinforced by the Knights of St. John following the attacks by the Ottoman Turks. Tiny, tiny little place, but very, very pretty. And then we walked round Victoria, the little town that's kind of sprung up around it. Again, absolutely pretty, gorgeous little place. It was hot that day, it was 29 degrees, and the hottest it had got up to there was only about 26, which I could just about cope with. 29 was a little bit too hot for me, but being on a very small island, there was quite a good breeze most of the time, so I managed to survive. On the Saturday, we jumped on the Slima ferry into Valletta, another ferry, specifically to go to the Freemasons Museum, because my dad is on the square, and it was somewhere he'd wanted to go the previous time and hadn't managed to get there. We had found it when we first went into Valletta on the Monday, and it said that the Masons Hall would be open from 11 till 3. So we arrived at 11 o'clock, and these guys were milling around, and they're wearing very scruffy, paint-splattered clothing. They were in the process of actually decorating the place. And they said, oh, are you here for the tour? My dad said, I didn't know there was a tour. We've come to see the museum. Oh, yes, the tour's at 12:30. So we just stayed. My dad had a beer, and hubby and Mumsy had a Coke, and I had a cup of tea, and we were talking to the guys. And the museum itself is in the process of being built, in the process of being set up. So we had the tour. We saw the Lodge Temple, and we saw Chapter Temple, and we saw the building itself, which belonged to one of the original Knights of St. John. It's a very old building. It has been used for many and various different purposes. It now belongs to the Freemasons of Malta. Weirdly, although we didn't get to see the museum in its full glory, I think personally we actually got a better experience, because we got up close and personal with all the items that are eventually going to end up in display cases, and in boxes on the wall. We actually got to see these things much more close up, and the guy that was showing us these various items that have been found was so enthusiastic, and he knew his history so well. He knew the history of the building, he knew the history of Freemasons in Malta, but even he was saying, he was showing us a Mason's jewel, and he was saying, I've been in the Masons for 44 years, I have never seen one of these, and we have no idea what it is. And his excitement and his passion was kind of infectious. So we didn't see the museum per se, but I think we actually had a better experience while we were there. And as a result of being there for much longer than we were expected, our additional little jaunt that afternoon didn't happen. So we just went back into Valletta and had some lunch, and then had a bimble out that evening for our final meal. I did say that I would vlog the holiday, but to be honest, I was having such a wonderful time with my family. I just felt that to be talking to the camera a lot would detract from that. I wasn't expecting to spend as much time with my dad as I did. But really, apart from our trip to Gozo, we went everywhere together, which was really nice. Dad and I did a lot of talking, a lot of kind of deep, meaningful conversations that went on until the early hours of the morning, or started, before breakfast, before everybody else was up. So we had a wonderful holiday. I did take a shed load of photographs, and I will put a montage up when I've finished talking at you. I hope you're all doing well, and until the next time, take care. Bye.